And so that's when I started investigating story and story structure and storytelling. And I want to share with you over the next couple of minutes everything that I've learned about story over the past 4 or 5 years. And hopefully if you understand this next section and you let it kind of lock into your brain, the next time that you're writing a presentation or a paper or anything like that, you'll just think, oh, I know how to do that. That's easy. So the first thing you need to know about a story is that it exists in space and that it has a before, which is before the story happens, versus an after. So as I'm going through this, you can fill it in with any of the stories that we've talked about today. If you want to think about, let's see, the cholera outbreak or SpaceX leaving Earth, all of them will follow this. I'm going to do learning how to ride a bike. Okay? So we've got before on the left where you don't know how to ride a bike, and after on the right where you do. And obviously in any story, you don't just snap from beginning to end. Something happens in the middle, but it's not really clear what it is. So let's just kind of fill that in right now and say that it is, in fact, the unknown. So we've got our story, we've still got our beginning, our before versus our after. We kind of broke things, so let's split this up and fix the 2 by 2. So now we can see that if we're gonna try to get from before to after, we have to dive into this period of the unknown and then come out again the other side. So if we're learning how to ride a bike, in the top left there, that's our entire life before we'd ever been on a bike. See them off in the distance, don't really understand how they work. But then, someone picks us up and places us on a bike for the first time ever. So you're on a threshold between known and unknown. And so what do? Well, you try to figure it out. You reach out, you grab onto the handles, you grab onto the pedals, you just start doing stuff and figuring it out. But you probably feel safe doing that because you know you've got this hand on your back. So then you start, pressing, going a little faster, until finally you realize that the hand's not on your back anymore. And you're actually driving the bike under your own ability. So then you can go back, you can stop, you can start, you can pop a wheelie, you can do all of this really exciting, cool stuff. You're not learning anymore. You figured out the core principle, now you're just mastering it. And then, when you get off the bike for the very first time, when you kind of step off of that threshold and you go back into the known world, the world is actually bigger because you can get on your bike at any time and you can go wherever you want. So this structure right here of known versus unknown, before versus after, this is at the absolute fundamental core of what a story is. And if you're following along, you can see that there were 7 pieces there. And so let's kind of pull this apart and look at it in a bit of a different context. Pull away all that stuff and just keep our 7 elements and unfold the story. So if we wanted to bring back the 2 by 2, you can actually see that the unknown is now in the middle, and we've got our before here on the left and our after on the right, and the 7 parts have names. So there's the start, the threshold, where the ordinary world is taken away. Then you have to deal with all this other stuff before there's this internal reaction. That's the permanent change. If someone's different from the beginning of the story at the end, the reaction is where that permanent change happens. There's an internal component to that change, an external component, and then finally you're ready to start another story. So this fundamental structure, if you believe in knowledge and time, you can derive it and you can find it inside of absolutely anything. And if we pull apart even more elements, cool. Thanks. So yeah. So at this point, I'm pretty sure that this thing is bulletproof. I mean, I don't write out stories every time, but you can follow this structure and these elements back through at every single level, and we can build it all back. And so this is basically, this is our fundamental story. If you had to do anything, if you're getting through school, it doesn't matter. You can break it down into the 4 quadrants, and then you can think about the experience of going around it. But you might also notice that not everything kind of breaks down into 7 parts really, really easily. So you can actually subdivide story parts, and then you can zoom in. So this would be down at the 2nd level of the story. And so let's say, if we're going from bottom right to bottom left, well, let's cut that in half again. We now have another 4-part story to get through. Well, we've got to zoom in again there. And then we can zoom all the way back out. And you can see this is what like a level 3 story looks like. And so at the At the absolute simplest, with 7 parts, is your start, threshold, and so on and so on. Then you can apply the 7 parts to each the beginning, middle, and end, and the structure maintains itself. And then you can apply it again at the 3rd level. So I've actually come up with an equation that governs like how many pieces a story has at different levels, but this stuff all hangs together. And if you're curious about how today's presentation came together this morning, so basically I got up around 8 or 8:30, started working at about 9, and I plotted out all of the different plot points that we were going to be talking about today and how the different stories fit together. And then I figured out, okay, how many minutes do I have for each element as I make my way through? And then I was able to just kind of hack together kind of different content in order to make sure that everything fits together. And amazingly, at like the really simple level, today's presentation breaks down to amazing computer stories, copy stories, grow better. So there's the caveman version if someone asks you for today's summary. It's always kind of fun to see this emergent property come out when you're working with something. Let's see, so where are we going from here? So this is where we are today, and here's where we are right now, kind of the return threshold right there. And so I wanted to show you some examples of, hey, so I found this thing through all this research, kind of looking at, basically it comes from Joseph Campbell and The Hero's Journey. It was this impenetrably difficult to read book about mythology. And so Joseph Campbell was like, yo, stories are really, really important. Here's this book that no one can read. And then Dan Harmon, who wrote Community and Rick and Morty, if you're familiar, he looked at Joseph Campbell's work and said, well, okay, that's cool, but I don't want to write Lord of the Rings. I want to write, half-hour comedies. And so he took the Joseph Campbell's framework and he distilled it down to 8 parts. And I looked at it and said, okay, well, that's really cool, but I don't want to write television shows. I want to use it for, writing white papers, writing presentations, writing emails, writing all this stuff. So I shook off all the parts and spent way too much time studying it. And this is kind of what I've come up with.